A billionaire CEO walked into his own restaurant as just another customer. No one recognized him as Jonathan Mercer, the founder of the Iron Grill diner chain. He wasn't there for a ribbon-cutting ceremony. He was simply there to have lunch with his son, and happened to overhear something he wasn't supposed to. A manager berating an employee, a terrified hostess on the verge of tears, and worst of all, cash mysteriously disappearing from the register, like it was routine. Over the next few days, he quietly observed and uncovered a corruption ring that reached all the way to the top levels of the company. This was no longer about lunch. It became a battle for justice, against those getting rich by stepping on the backs of the workers. Stay until the end, because the final reveal will leave you stunned. Please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to update our latest videos. The midday sun poured across the streets of Houston, glinting off the glossy black SUV as it pulled up to a corner restaurant. On the sign above the entrance, bold red and yellow letters read, Iron Grill Diner, one of hundreds of locations spanning the U.S., a symbol of the fast food empire that Jonathan Mercer had built from nothing. But today, Jonathan wasn't arriving as the founder. He stepped out of the car in dark jeans and a simple polo shirt, his hair slightly tousled, looking more like a dad fresh from a morning workout with his son. Beside him, 10-year-old Tyler Mercer bounced excitedly, wearing a cartoon t-shirt and brand new sneakers. The boy looked up with sparkling eyes. I get to order my own drink today, right? I want a burger, the biggest one. Jonathan chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. Let's see if this place is still as good as the last time I stopped by. Maybe. The two pushed open the glass doors, stepping inside as the familiar scent filled the air. Grilled meat, crispy fries, and faint traces of floor cleaner still lingering from the morning shift. But something felt off. Jonathan sensed it immediately, the way only someone who had worked in kitchens, sat in boardrooms, and trained thousands on customer experience would. The energy inside wasn't right for a Saturday lunch rush. He scanned the room, plenty of customers, the soft clatter of cutlery, but the staff was strangely silent. No cheerful greetings, no playful banter from the kitchen. Only the flat, robotic lines muttered through clenched teeth, like they were being forced to speak. At the register stood a young woman, name tag Naomi Ellis. Her eyes were puffy, her lipstick faded, and her hands trembled as she tapped at the POS screen. Jonathan noticed her smile never reached her eyes. An elderly woman ahead of him in line turned and left. Naomi exhaled, a long, weary breath, like she'd just finished a brutal test. Jonathan turned to Tyler, giving him a playful wink. Ready for the taste test? This might be a lunch to remember. Remember as in delicious or gross? Tyler wrinkled his nose, sniffing the air suspiciously. Jonathan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped up to the counter. Hi there, I'll take one Iron Classic combo, extra fries, and a kid's meal, double fries for this little guy. Naomi nodded mechanically. Her voice was small, hurried. Yes, your order number is 47. Please wait a few minutes. She handed over the receipt without looking up. Jonathan took it, but his eyes stayed on her. Something about her movements, her energy, held his attention. After Tyler settled near the window, Jonathan pretended to head toward the restroom. But he didn't go in. Instead, he quietly veered down a side hallway leading to the employee area. A small door marked Staff Only sat ajar, and from behind that door came a voice. Cold, cutting, contemptuous. You think you matter here? Look at you. I could replace you by this afternoon. Jonathan froze. His hand hovered against the cold wall. His heart beat slow, but steady. He knew that tone. He had fired people like that before. But this time, that voice was coming from inside his own restaurant chain. His eyes narrowed, and his heart, the heart of a father, sank. Not just for Tyler, but for every Naomi who had to bow their head just to make it through the day. This wasn't going to be just another lunch. It would be the spark. That ignites the biggest reckoning of Jonathan Mercer's career. Jonathan stood motionless, just a few steps away from the employees-only door. The chill of the white-painted wall pressed against his back, but in his chest, something was burning, rising steadily with every breath. From inside, that voice continued, sharp as a dagger slicing through the air. "I don't care how long you've worked here. One more slip and I'll cut your shifts. Got it?" Naomi Ellis. She didn't reply, but Jonathan could picture it. The hunched posture, hands clenched tightly, eyes trying to stay calm while her heart raced. He had seen this scene before, and he had once been the only one to step in and end it. The man's voice struck again, lower now, but more dangerous. "You're not a victim, Ellis. You're a pawn. Got that? I run everything here, and you should remember, people who open their mouths, they disappear." Silence followed. A chilling silence, like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. No protest, only submission. Jonathan's fists tightened. He had made a promise to himself long ago. If the day ever came when Iron Grill Diner strayed from its core values, he would not tolerate it. And now he had heard it with his own ears. Not from a report, not through a complaint letter, but directly. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He needed more. He needed to know exactly who the man was. The door swung open. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, slightly wrinkled white shirt, collar unbuttoned. He stopped briefly, spotting Jonathan facing the wall, pretending to look for the restroom. Their eyes met for only a moment, but Jonathan knew, from the arrogance in his stare, from the lack of guilt after barking at an employee. This was Craig Bentley, the branch manager, and the rot poisoning his empire from the inside out. "Restrooms that way," Craig said flatly, nodding toward the door on the left, his voice still tinged with the venom from his earlier tirade. Jonathan gave a tight, polite smile and nodded. "Thanks." But in his mind, a plan was already forming. He had dealt with men like Craig before, but he had never seen their victims pushed this far, and this time, he wouldn't walk away. Back at the table, Tyler waved excitedly. "Dad, I tried the fries. They're super crispy." Jonathan sat down, eyes still fixed on the counter. Naomi had returned to her station, standing straight as if nothing had happened. But her hands trembled. She accidentally dropped a plastic tray, the sound loud and dry. Craig emerged from the back, arms crossed, leaning against the counter like a predator watching over a herd of frightened prey. Jonathan took a sip of water. His gaze was no longer that of a customer. It was the gaze of an owner on the verge of erupting. This time, justice wouldn't arrive quietly. It would arrive right in front of everyone, in broad daylight, with witnesses all around. And Craig would never forget the day he dared to threaten a girl wearing a name tag that read, "Iron Grill Diner." Jonathan remained at the table, eyes fixed on the service counter. He didn't need reports or data to tell him. Something here was rotten to the core. Naomi Ellis stood behind the register like a shadow. Her movements were precise, but lifeless. She didn't smile, and every time a customer walked away, her shoulders would drop, just barely. in a way that only someone watching closely would notice. She was living in fear, and she wasn't alone. In the back kitchen, Jonathan noticed a man, mid-40s, dark brown skin, broad shoulders, eyes sharp with focus. Unlike the other staff, he wasn't rushing, wasn't shaking, but he wasn't relaxed either. There was something resolute about his silence. Jonathan stood. Tyler was still happily eating, unaware. He pretended to go get more ketchup and waited just as the man stepped out with a tray of food. "Looks hot back there," Jonathan said casually, like a breeze passing through. The man paused briefly, then replied curtly, "You get used to it." Jonathan glanced at the name tag pinned to his chest, Luis Ramirez. "You been here long?" Luis glanced toward the corner ceiling camera, then lowered his voice. "Long enough to know not to answer questions like that." Jonathan let out a soft chuckle. He leaned back slightly, giving off a relaxed air. "I'm not with corporate. Just, the place feels more like a hospital than a diner." Luis paused. He set the tray on the counter. His voice was even, but laced with bitterness. "He doesn't have to yell much. Just standing there's enough to make people mess up." "He?" Luis didn't need to say the name. Jonathan already knew. Every time Bentley walks out of that office, the whole place freezes. Luis stared at the stainless steel tray. "I've seen shifts cut for no reason. I've seen money go missing from the drawer. And I've seen people like Naomi swallow tears and still smile at customers." A moment of silence. "You ever think about leaving?" Jonathan asked gently. Luis answered immediately, without hesitation. "I don't stay because I'm scared. I stay because, if I leave, who's left to watch, to remember, to be ready when it's time to stand up?" Right then, Jonathan knew. He'd just found his first ally. Luis didn't say much, but his eyes spoke clearly. "I'm still here. I'm still watching. And I haven't surrendered." Jonathan returned to his table, mind spinning with the puzzle pieces falling into place. The picture was becoming clearer. Craig Bentley wasn't just a bad manager, he was a manipulator. A wolf wearing a supervisor's shirt, and the sheep had nowhere left to run. The door chime jingled as another customer entered Iron Grill Diner. Jonathan Mercer remained still, pretending to read the menu, though his eyes followed only one person, Craig Bentley. Craig emerged from the small back office, adjusting his tie as he walked, his expression unbothered despite the tense atmosphere gripping the restaurant like a drawn wire. He didn't smile, he said nothing, but every employee instantly stiffened, as if someone had pulled a silent alarm. Naomi shrank slightly as he passed. A server holding a tray turned away, avoiding his gaze. Only Luis, back in the kitchen, remained steady, calm, but eyes sharp as they tracked Craig's every step. Jonathan kept up his act of nonchalance, but his body had gone taut, a bowstring pulled tight. He couldn't intervene, not yet, but he could watch and remember. Then it happened. Craig strode casually to the front register. No one followed. No one noticed, except Jonathan. Craig stood there, pretending to check the system. His fingers tapped swiftly across the keypad. The drawer popped open, the click soft but clear to Jonathan's ears. In one fluid motion, Craig's hand slipped into the drawer, and with a movement as sharp as a snap of the fingers, he pulled out 3 $20 bills. No counting, no notation, no close-up camera, just a routine act, repeated enough times to become reckless. He slid the bills into the inner pocket of his vest, shut the register as if nothing had happened, and calmly turned to walk away. Jonathan clenched the glass of water on his table. His palm was ice cold. There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't just bad management. This was theft, bold and blatant, in broad daylight, inside a restaurant bearing his own name. But he didn't jump to react. He didn't stand up. He had seen mistakes made in the past, acting too fast, too emotionally. Craig Bentley was no rookie. If he could steal this effortlessly, he'd done it hundreds of times. And clearly he'd grown used to getting away with it. If he wasn't afraid, someone above him must be shielding him. Under the table, Jonathan discreetly pulled out his phone, opened his notes app, and typed one simple line. 3:24 p.m. Craig opened register, took cash, no receipt, no explanation. Movements were practiced. He hit save, and his eyes, once calm, had now sharpened. Something inside Jonathan Mercer had awakened. Not a burst of anger, but the start of a plan. The anger inside Jonathan Mercer was no longer ablaze. It had cooled into embers, steady, sharp, and enduring. He knew he couldn't act yet. To take down an entire system, he needed evidence and a witness. And no one knew the truth better than the one who stood there every day, silently enduring it. Naomi Ellis. As she passed by, carrying a tray of glassware to be cleaned, Jonathan rose from his seat and slowly followed her toward the beverage station. He didn't wear a suit. He didn't reveal who he was. He was just a customer, one who cared a little more than he should have. Been working here long? His voice was light, almost casual. Naomi glanced quickly toward the main counter, where Craig still prowled like a wolf circling a henhouse. She didn't answer right away. "A while," she finally said, drying the glass with slightly quicker hands than before. Jonathan nodded. "It's busy today, but people seem tense." Naomi gave a bitter smile. "We've learned how to smile like this." He said nothing more, letting the silence hang, giving her space to decide if she would take the next step. And then she did. "Are you a reporter?" Her voice was low, steady, but direct. Jonathan was slightly caught off guard, but kept a calm expression. "Number? But I have a reason to care about what's happening here." Naomi placed the glass down. She looked at him, eyes no longer just fearful, but filled with a quiet storm, a struggle between trust and the fear of being crushed once more. "Craig doesn't just yell." She spoke softly. "He cuts shifts if you speak up, then writes fake infractions in the report. And when no one checks the facts, who's going to believe people like us?" Jonathan gave a small nod, staying silent. Naomi continued, as if months of silence were finally cracking open. "I've seen him take money from the drawer more than once. I reported it to Mitchell Crane, higher up. They promised to look into it. 3 weeks later, my closest co-worker was fired." "Reason?" Jonathan asked quietly. Naomi looked him dead in the eye. "For having an attitude inconsistent with a positive work environment." She enunciated every word, as if slicing into the hypocrisy that had suffocated them for too long. Jonathan's fists tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. "And yet, you stayed." Naomi lifted her chin. "Because if I left too, who would still be here to witness?" A long silence followed. Then Jonathan placed a small, folded business card face down on the counter. "Maybe I'm not the person you've been waiting for, but if the day comes when you're ready to change things, call this number." He walked away. Naomi stood there, hand resting on the tray of glasses. She didn't flip the card. Not yet. But her eyes, for the first time in months, held a glimmer of something she thought she'd lost. Not everyone can speak, but once someone dares to listen, silence begins to shatter. Storms often begin with just a whisper of wind. 3 days after her quiet, cryptic conversation with Jonathan, Naomi Ellis could feel the storm closing in. Not from the sky, but from the sharpened tone and watchful eyes of Craig Bentley. He had started hovering more often near Naomi's station. No yelling, no open insults, just cold, clipped questions and stares that lingered longer than necessary. Sometimes he simply stood there, silent, like a ghost. And Naomi knew Craig was suspicious. That afternoon, as the dinner rush died down, golden light spilled through the diner's windows. Naomi was gathering glassware when Craig's shadow stretched across the floor behind her. "You've been talking more than usual lately." His voice was flat, but every word landed on her spine like a hammer. Naomi tightened her grip around a glass. "I'm doing my job, Mr. Bentley." Craig smiled, not wide, but enough. The smug smile of a man who knows he holds power and knows you're afraid to challenge it. "Sure, I just worry sometimes that people forget what keeps them around. You know, some used to think they were special." He took a step closer. "Now they're especially gone." The words dropped like a slab of stone. Naomi held herself steady, but her blood rushed hot to her ears. "Are you threatening me?" Her voice was quiet but firm. Craig leaned in, his face just inches from hers. "No, Naomi, I'm reminding you, and you should be thankful for that." Then he turned and walked off, disappearing back into his office, leaving her frozen, trembling. From across the diner, Jonathan Mercer had seen everything. He couldn't hear Craig's words, but Naomi's expression. The way her body recoiled like ice had filled her bones, told him enough. Jonathan clenched the phone in his pocket. It was time to end this. He stood and quietly left the Iron Grill diner, saying nothing to anyone. But as the door closed behind him, his eyes were no longer the eyes of a silent observer. They were the eyes of a man who was about to return. And next time, he wouldn't be coming alone. When the darkness begins to whisper threats, that is exactly when the light must step in. That night, in a modest hotel room overlooking a Houston highway, the glow from a laptop screen cast sharp light across Jonathan Mercer's tense face. On the screen was the internal accounting system of Iron Grill Diner, a platform he had once helped design to ensure transparency and protect employee rights. But now that very tool would help him track down the saboteur from within. Jonathan began by filtering revenue reports from the Houston branch, where Craig Bentley was manager, covering the past 6 months. The results made his brow immediately furrow. Revenue during Craig's direct shifts was consistently 17% lower than average, despite similar customer volume. Meanwhile, costs for ingredients, beef, cheese, potatoes, had not gone down accordingly. He dug into the inventory logs next and found several after-hours supply additions that had no corresponding sales records. All of them were authorized and signed off by Craig Bentley. Then Jonathan accessed the internal adjustments section, a restricted area where only senior managers could log incidental expenses. A red column appeared repeatedly: adjustment, broken equipment, MISC repairs, $312.65, authorized by C. Bentley. Nearly 40 entries in just 3 months. Strangely, none of them had receipts or documentation. A perfect loophole for siphoning money off the books. Jonathan leaned back in his chair and took a deep breath. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was evidence. He picked up his phone and dialed the only person on the executive team he still trusted: Elliot Price, Chief Financial Officer. The call rang just 3 times. I'm looking at the Houston branch system, Jonathan began as soon as Elliot picked up. There are irregular revenue patterns, unexplained cost entries, and internal adjustments with no paper trail. There was a pause on the other end. Then Elliot spoke, slowly. I know, I've seen them too. But I didn't have clearance to dig deeper. Houston is currently overseen by Mitchell Crane. Jonathan's grip on the phone tightened. Mitchell Crane, regional director, long praised as the eagle eye of Iron Grill, a frequent face at leadership seminars, hailed as a model of efficiency. Elliot continued, his voice dropping, and the final sign-off on those reports is Mitchell himself. I've had my doubts, but without an executive order, I couldn't open an internal inquiry. Jonathan stood, eyes fixed on the screen, at the line that read, Adjustment approved by Ms. Crane. Well, now you have that order, Elliot. I want every file, every transaction, every approval involving Craig Bentley and Mitchell Crane on my desk. In 24 hours. What started as a shadowed threat had led Jonathan to a single thread. But Craig Bentley wasn't acting alone. He was protected from above, and if Mitchell Crane could shield him from the company's own oversight system, then this wasn't just a rotten restaurant. It was a cancer spreading through the entire Iron Grill empire. The next morning, before sunlight had even pierced through the frosted windows of the corporate offices, Elliot Price was already seated in the 9th floor conference room at Iron Grill Diner's headquarters. In front of him lay a thick folder titled Houston Branch Operational Report, Oversight Craig Bentley, Approval Mitchell Crane. The door swung open. Jonathan Mercer walked in, his eyes sharp, the calm demeanor of a CEO replaced by something far more resolute. Talk to me, he said, sitting down without any pleasantries. Elliot nodded. I reviewed every internal adjustment authorization, emergency fund withdrawal, and internal report from Craig Bentley over the past 12 months. He slid a stack of papers across the table toward Jonathan. The person who approved all of it, none other than Mitchell Crane. Jonathan flipped through the pages, every line, every number, like a blade cutting through his trust. It all matched. Unexplained revenue drops, vague operational expenses, cash withdrawals with no trace. There's more than one store affected, Elliot added, his voice lowering. Houston's not the only one. I found the same patterns in Austin, Dallas, and Phoenix, all under Mitchell's direct supervision. Jonathan's fists clenched. What had once been a suspicion now had a clear form. Mitchell wasn't just covering things up, he was orchestrating them. What about employee feedback? Complaints? Elliot shook his head slightly. Some, but all of them were stopped before reaching HR. A number were marked as lacking evidence, or labeled as personal conflict. I believe Mitchell has someone filtering complaints from the inside. Jonathan leaned back, his mind spinning like a turbine. A plan began to take shape. Expose Craig publicly, right at the Houston branch, trigger media pressure, bring the story into the light. Lead the public to one question. Who let this happen for so many years? And only one name would rise, Mitchell Crane. Elliot glanced at Jonathan, hesitant. You know, if we do this, we're going up against the highest levels of power. Jonathan nodded, eyes like steel. Then let me be the one to light the match. He stood, taking the folder in hand. I'm going back to Houston, not to observe, to act. Mitchell Crane believed himself untouchable. With regional authority, a loyal HR network, and the silent compliance of the board. But what he never saw coming was that Jonathan Mercer had entered the battlefield. And this time he wasn't fighting alone. Jonathan Mercer left Elliot Price's office that night. He didn't return to the hotel. Instead, he drove straight to a small 24/7 cafe on the outskirts of Houston, where Naomi Ellis and Luis Ramirez were waiting. There was no coffee, no polite greetings, only direct eye contact, clear and without doubt. "I need to know," Jonathan said. "All the people who were fired by Craig Bentley or Mitchell Crane, the ones who spoke up and then vanished." Naomi nodded slowly. "I've stayed in touch with some of them, but they're scared. They were threatened, smeared. Some even had their visas used against them." Luis cut in, his voice more intense than usual. "There's one person you need to meet first. His name's Daniel Morales. He was assistant manager before me. Craig let him go after a so-called reporting discrepancy. But Daniel told me he didn't mess anything up." 2 days later, first witness, Daniel Morales. In a small apartment in East Houston, Daniel appeared at the door with sunken eyes and a wary stare. But when Jonathan introduced himself, CEO of Iron Grill Diner, Daniel went still. You're the president. I'm the man trying to end what's been rotting this company from the inside. Tell me everything." Daniel hesitated for a second, then opened a drawer and pulled out a worn notebook. "I knew I was going to get fired, so I started keeping records. Every adjustment Craig forced me to sign. No receipts, no invoices, just my signature, under pressure." Jonathan flipped through the pages. Numbers, dates, detailed notes. This was the first puzzle piece of a much bigger picture. Second witness, Cassandra Lewis, former regional office accountant. Naomi contacted Cassandra through social media. They met in a car parked behind a quiet bookstore. Cassandra arrived wearing a baseball cap and mask. She had once been reassigned by Mitchell Crane after flagging suspicious payroll entries. "I found over 30 expenses that didn't match the ledgers. When I reported it, I was reassigned to a different region the next week. The month after that, I resigned. I couldn't take the pressure anymore." Jonathan pulled out a recorder. "Would you be willing to tell all of this, publicly?" Cassandra sat in silence for a moment, then nodded slowly. "If it helps people like Naomi stop living in fear, then yes, I will." The witness list now had 4 names. Naomi Ellis, first-hand witness, directly threatened. Luis Ramirez, long-time observer, honest and steady. Daniel Morales, former assistant manager with handwritten evidence. Cassandra Lewis, former regional accountant, understands how Mitchell manipulated the system. Jonathan wrote 5 bold words across his planning notebook: "Expose the entire system." Because this time, he wasn't just going to fire a corrupt manager. He was going to drag an entire rotten empire into the light. That afternoon, the Iron Grill Diner branch in Houston was buzzing with customers. No one noticed the man in a crisp white shirt, charcoal grey blazer, and dark sunglasses walking straight through the front doors, except Naomi Ellis. She froze behind the cashier counter the moment she recognized Jonathan Mercer, CEO and founder of the company. But this time, he wasn't here as a disguised customer. He had returned as the man leading a reckoning. Jonathan didn't stop at the ordering counter. He clapped twice, sharp and echoing through the dining room. "I'm Jonathan Mercer, and I need every employee of this branch to gather now." Whispers spread. Cooks peeked from behind the kitchen line. Customers glanced around in confusion. Naomi slowly set down her tray, locking eyes with Luis, who straightened behind the fryer. Craig Bentley emerged from the back office, smug as ever, his grin lazy and defiant. "Well, Jonathan, what a surprise visit. What's with the theatrics?" Jonathan ignored him. He raised a thick stack of color-coded documents and turned to face the entire staff. For the past 6 months, this branch has been drained by a deliberate and calculated fraud scheme. Thousands of dollars, gone. Today, I'm naming the person behind it. One by one, Jonathan flipped through the files. Sales reports with suspicious dips, only during Craig's shifts. Payroll records with manipulated figures. Internal surveillance showing Craig pocketing cash off register. A sworn statement from Daniel Morales, former assistant manager. Forged signatures. A signed confirmation from Cassandra Lewis, former regional accountant. Jonathan stepped closer, holding a printed report in front of Craig. "Care to explain why revenue consistently drops only when you're on shift?" Craig chuckled, but his lips had gone pale. "Revenue fluctuates. That's normal. It's the food industry." "And what about tampering with payroll? The threats? The toxic work environment your team has reported?" Craig shrugged. "Kids these days just can't handle pressure. They love playing victim." That's when Naomi stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but it rang clear. "You told me. You know what happens to people who open their mouths. Well, today, I'm opening mine." Luis followed. "I've seen you take cash 3 times. Each time like it was a rehearsed performance." The room shifted. Young staffers looked at each other, realization dawning. Someone murmured, "So it was true." Craig's composure cracked. He snapped, voice rising, "You all think you've won? You think I'm the only one? You really believe the big bosses upstairs didn't know? Wake up." Jonathan didn't flinch. He turned to the room. "He's right about one thing. He's not the only one, but he is where it starts." He faced Craig again, voice cold, precise. "Craig Bentley, you are officially suspended. Your access has been revoked. This case is being escalated to our legal department." Craig stiffened. No one came to his defense. Naomi, Luis, the staff, all stood straight, silent but no longer afraid. Craig sneered, taking a step back. "Good luck cleaning up this mess. You've only scratched the surface." Then he turned and walked out. The glass door swung shut behind him. Jonathan exhaled deeply. Then he looked at every employee in the room. "Things will change. And for those who've stayed silent, your voices will be heard." There was no applause, no cheering, but the eyes that once avoided his now met his gaze, steady and unblinking. The first curtain had been pulled back, but just as Craig warned, the real darkness still lies beyond. Just 3 days after the confrontation at Iron Grill Houston, Jonathan Mercer received a call at 6 a.m. from the corporate communications department. "You need to turn on the news immediately." Jonathan stepped over to the hotel desk, turned on the TV, and with just one glance, he knew exactly who was behind this counterstrike. CEO Jonathan Mercer fires veteran manager Craig Bentley in surprise purge. Staff left uncertain and fearful. Iron Grill Diner faces leadership crisis. Signs of internal power struggle emerging. Is the once revered CEO destroying his own empire? The news spread like wildfire. Social media exploded with sensational headlines, toxic commentary, and analysis videos, clearly backed by shady YouTube channels and planted narratives. A message buzzed from Elliot Price. "Mitchell Crane has made his move. He's pulling media strings. Worse, he's got allies on the board." Jonathan clenched his phone. Just like Craig Bentley warned, He was merely the gatekeeper. The real puppeteer was Mitchell Crane, the regional director who had staged this entire performance. Jonathan called Elliot immediately. "Do you have anything for me?" Elliot answered directly. "I reviewed the suspicious adjustments Craig submitted across the system. There's a recurring pattern. It matches with 3 other locations. And all were approved by Mitchell." Jonathan held his breath. "Is that it?" Elliot hesitated, then lowered his voice. "There's also a wire transfer from Mitchell to an investment fund. That fund belongs to a man named Gregory Warren." Jonathan's blood ran cold. Gregory was a senior board member, once a trusted ally during the early days of building Iron Grill. "Are you sure?" "Confirmed. I'm sending you the transaction ID and internal emails now." The battle lines were now crystal clear. Craig Bentley, the enforcer. Mitchell Crane, the mastermind. Gregory Warren, the power behind the curtain. This wasn't just corruption. They had turned Iron Grill into a private financial playground, using employees as pawns and willing to destroy anyone who threatened their control. Jonathan stared at his reflection in the mirror. The exhaustion of sleepless nights showed in the lines on his face, but in his eyes a fire, clearer and more focused than ever before. "If they want war, I'll bring it straight to the boardroom." 3 days after the underhanded counterattack from Mitchell Crane and Gregory Warren, Jonathan Mercer struck back. But he didn't do it in silence. He did it under the glare of camera lights, in front of the entire country. The West Houston Civic Hall, a venue far removed from the Iron Grill boardrooms, became the new front line for truth. Backstage, Naomi Ellis clutched the mic with trembling hands. Luis Ramirez stood beside her, hands in his pockets, trying to mask the tension. Cassandra, the former accountant forced out, took a long breath. And Daniel Carter, the ex-assistant manager, held a thick folder of printed records. Jonathan entered, eyes sweeping across them all. "I know this is terrifying, but if we don't speak today, hundreds more will be silenced tomorrow. Today, we're not just telling the story. We're exposing it." Naomi nodded, no more hesitation. They walked into the light. Flashbulbs fired, cameras whirred, every seat was filled. The national press was here. Jonathan stepped to the podium, no script in hand. "My name is Jonathan Mercer, founder of Iron Grill Diner, and today I'm not standing here as a CEO. I stand here as a father, a leader, and a man betrayed by the very system he built." He raised the file in his hand. "This is the truth." Naomi stepped up. "My name is Naomi Ellis. I was threatened, had my hours cut, called useless by Craig Bentley. Every time I tried to speak up, I was told, 'You'll be the next to disappear.'" Gasps rippled through the room. But Naomi stood firm, her voice cracking, yet unshaken. "I used to believe I didn't matter, but today I know. Silence is complicity." Luis followed. "I worked in the kitchen. I saw Craig pull cash straight from the register without logging it. I used to think it wasn't my place to say anything. I was wrong." He paused, then stared directly into the camera lens. "There are more Craig Bentleys out there, and there will be more, unless we stop it now." Daniel Carter spoke next. "I was an assistant manager. When I filed internal reports about financial misconduct, I was fired a week later. The reason? Lack of leadership skills. The truth? I saw what they didn't want anyone to see." Finally, Cassandra, former regional accountant. "I sent 4 emails flagging suspicious adjustment expenses. All 4 were ignored. 1 week later, I was restructured out of my position." She held up a USB drive. I kept the internal copies. These are the tampered financials approved by Mitchell Crane and co-signed by Gregory Warren. The truth exploded. Within 2 hours, major headlines swept across the country. Iron Grill Diner exposes regional director and board member for corruption and theft. Whistleblowers speak out inside the culture of fear at one of America's largest restaurant chains. Naomi Ellis, from threatened employee to face of justice. Across social media, the hashtag #Justice for Iron Grill hit top 5 nationwide within 3 hours. A new wave of public sentiment surged, and this time it was on the side of truth. Iron Grill Diner headquarters, 40th floor boardroom. The late afternoon sun filtered through towering glass panes, casting golden streaks across the oak conference table where the most powerful figures in the corporation sat. But today, none of them looked at ease. Not after yesterday's press conference that shook the entire nation. Jonathan Mercer entered the room without need for introduction. He carried a black briefcase, placed it firmly on the table, and locked eyes with Gregory Warren, seated at the far end, attempting calm but betraying a cold furrow in his brow. Jonathan began, "I called this meeting because we have a serious problem. A system of fraud has been allowed to flourish for years, protected by the very people meant to preserve this organization's integrity." He pulled out printed records and placed them in front of each board member. "Everything you need is in these files: financial manipulation, wage theft, silencing whistleblowers, all tied to Craig Bentley, Mitchell Crane, and someone sitting in this room." Every gaze turned sharply toward Gregory Warren. Gregory leaned back, voice tinged with sarcasm. "I think you're confusing corporate leadership with a courtroom, Jonathan." Jonathan stayed composed. He slid forward a copy of a banking transaction. "This is a covert wire transfer from Mitchell Crane's personal account to a shell company under your ownership, Gregory." A silent shock rippled across the room. "It was sent exactly 2 days after you approved Craig Bentley's promotion." Despite numerous internal complaints from the Dallas and San Antonio branches. Gregory curled his lips into a smirk. "That was a strategic investment." Jonathan laid down another document. "And this is the transcript of a private meeting between you and Mitchell, held at an off-the-record restaurant, the same week that internal accountant Cassandra was forced out. At that moment, Sarah Whitmore, co-founder of Iron Grill Diner, known for her silence, stood. Her voice was cold and clear as she looked directly at Gregory. "I was here when this company was just a food truck. Never did I imagine the day I'd watch a board member accept money to protect someone stealing from the very employees who built this place." Gregory shot up from his chair. "There's nothing in there that proves I gave any orders." Jonathan replied calmly, "Perhaps not, but it proves you knew, and you chose to stay silent." The room fell still. One board member finally spoke. "I moved to suspend Gregory Warren immediately, pending an independent investigation." "I second." "Agreed." One by one, votes of affirmation followed, not a single dissent. Sarah turned to Jonathan. "I was wrong to stay quiet for so long, but that ends today. Mitchell Crane has been terminated. And now, Gregory, so are you." Gregory clenched his briefcase, his face stiff, eyes locked on Jonathan. "You think you've won, don't you?" Jonathan didn't answer. He simply met Gregory's stare. And at that moment, Gregory understood. He hadn't just lost a power struggle. He lost to a man who refused to sell out his conscience. 2 weeks after the fateful board meeting, Iron Grill Diner entered a period of sweeping reform. The full-scale internal audit initiated by Jonathan Mercer had expanded across the entire network. Dozens of mid-level managers were suspended, some resigning overnight, knowing the game was over. But this wasn't just about punishment. Jonathan didn't want Iron Grill to be clean only on paper. He wanted to rebuild it, from the roots up, at the Houston branch, where it all began. Naomi Ellis, once the trembling front desk employee, now stood in a small meeting room wearing a crisp new uniform, her name tag reading Assistant Manager. On her wrist was a simple bracelet, a gift from Tyler Mercer on the day of her promotion, engraved with "Keep Standing." Jonathan shook her hand firmly. "You don't just deserve this role, you're the symbol of everything we want to grow." Naomi was speechless, overwhelmed by how much had changed in just a few short weeks. Luis Ramirez, the steady kitchen cook who had quietly protected his team, had now been appointed regional supervisor for the Southern Division. He looked down at the contract in disbelief and muttered, "I don't even own a suit." Jonathan smiled gently. "Then pick a good one. You're going to need it." Luis smiled for the first time in years, without hesitation, without restraint. At Iron Grill headquarters, Jonathan and Elliot Price launched 3 major reform initiatives: a national anonymous feedback system where any employee could report misconduct, with full protection; mandatory ethical leadership training for all managerial staff focused not only on performance, but on integrity and human decency; a whistleblower protection policy, ensuring that the person who speaks up is never the one shown the door. Sarah Whitmore, now interim chair of the board, addressed the entire company. Iron Grill once let fear run the show. Starting today, we choose fairness. 1 week later, back at the Houston branch, Naomi led the morning team meeting. She didn't talk about sales targets, she talked about trust. "I used to work here when every gaze stayed down, but today I want us all to lift our heads high." The entire staff applauded, not out of obligation, but because for the first time, they believed this place belonged to them. On the wall hung a new slogan, a quote from Jonathan himself: "A strong brand isn't built on profit, it's built on trust." Iron Grill Diner was no longer just a symbol of a fast food chain. It had become the story of a community reborn. A declaration that justice can begin with something as simple as a lunch. Sunday afternoon, the Texas sun lit up the familiar awning of the Iron Grill Houston branch. Jonathan Mercer stepped out of the car with his son, Tyler. No longer a CEO in disguise, no longer hesitant eyes, no secret agendas. Today he was just a father and a customer. Tyler looked around, eyes gleaming. "You're not sneaking off to inspect anything today, right?" Jonathan laughed. "Nope, today we're just here for lunch." The glass doors swung open. The atmosphere inside was nothing like that first day. The familiar smell of grilled food, the sound of laughter, footsteps without fear. Behind the front counter stood Naomi Ellis, now assistant manager. She spotted them instantly, her smile lighting up the room. "Welcome back, you two." Tyler grinned wide. "I want 2 orders of fries today." Naomi tilted her head playfully. "If you finish them, I'll throw in a cookie." In the kitchen, Luis Ramirez was guiding a group of new staff on how to prepare the Iron Smash Classic. He still had his calm demeanor, but now there was confidence in his eyes, confidence born from being trusted and empowered. Jonathan glanced around. No more darting eyes, no more hesitant steps, only people being themselves. He and Tyler sat at the table by the window. Across the room, a young couple nodded hello. A truck driver near the bar asked for another soda and softly whistled along with the music. An older man approached Naomi and asked, "Excuse me, I don't remember this place ever feeling so welcoming." Naomi smiled, her gaze gentle. "That's because now it belongs to us." Their meal arrived: crispy fries, hot burgers. Jonathan watched Tyler dip his fries in sauce, laughing. He took a deep breath. This feeling, you couldn't buy it with money. Iron Grill Diner had once been just a chain of restaurants. Then it became a stain. But now, it was trust, rebuilt through courage. Beneath the serving tray, a new message was etched in fine print. A good meal begins with respect. Jonathan closed his eyes for a brief moment, not out of weariness, but in quiet recognition that every second of the journey had been worth it. Have you ever thought, can a father taking his son to lunch change an entire company? Jonathan didn't just expose a corrupt man. He dared to listen to voices trembling in the dark. He dared to stand up, even when the whole system stood against him. And most importantly, he gave the voice back to those who had once been forced into silence. If you found inspiration in this story, share it. And don't forget to comment below. What makes you believe justice still exists? Thank you for watching. See you in the next story, where true power belongs to courage.